everybody, welcome back to my channel ASP.NET Core Web API Part 5. In the previous episode, we stored all of our data in the SQL Server with the help of Entity Framework Core. But there is a problem with the way that we are doing. Our API is directly exposing the task item entity, and the client can send the data that it shouldn't control. For example, the client can decide the value of the ID, the value of is completed. In this video, we are gonna to learn how we can solve all of this problem. And for example, if the client send the task title empty, in this video, we are gonna to learn how we can manage all of this problem. By the end of the video, you will learn DTO and the model validation. Don't waste the time and let's get started. So welcome back. Let me tell you a little about the previous video. In the previous video, we connect our web API, this controller, to SQL Server using Entity Framework Core. And if you take a look at my database, I have a task management DB and a task table. And in my task table, I have 4 column ID, title, description, and is completed. We create our task item entity here. Let me show you. Task item entity, configure our DB context into the app DB context, and create a migration and implement CRUD operation. Our task item currently look like this. Let me take a look at the task item, ID, title, description, and is completed. And in our DB context, we have our task table here. Task table. Everything works, but let's look at our post endpoint. Let me come to the task controller in the HTTP post. Right now we are doing something like this, and the problem is that we're using our database entity, task item, directly as the API endpoint. That's a bad habit, and this is something we usually don't want to do. And why? There's a question, why don't we send our entity directly to the client? There's a special question like this. Let me run the project and explain to you. Wait, and I want to come here and show you. Let me open the post and try it out. And here, for example, the client sends something like this. The ID is 100 and the title is something like this. And the description is something like this, and the is completed is true. Technically, our API can accept all of this, but think about that. When we are creating a new task, should the client decide the ID? It's so important. Usually, no. The database should generate the ID. And maybe when we create a task, we also want is completed to always start as a false. So we need a way to control exactly what our API accept. For example, the client sent the title. The task title is so important. For example, it sent me an empty string. So that's where a DTO comes in. But there's a question, how we can create a DTO. So let's do that. So it's time to create our first DTO. It's so important. Let me tell you what is a DTO. DTO stands for Data Transfer Object. A DTO, my friends, a DTO is simply an object that defines the data we want to transfer through our API. For example, we want to let the client send the title. For example, we want the client send the description. But we don't want the client decide for the ID. We don't want the client, when we want to create a task, decide for the is completed. For situation like this, we create DTO. Okay. For creating a DTO, I come here, right click on my project, add a new folder, and I'm gonna to call that DTO, data transfer object. Inside the DTO, I'm gonna to create a class. For this is the right click, add and create a class. When you want to create a DTO, for calling the DTO, there's a special conventioning name. For example, the name of the task you want, okay, the entity, and after that the DTO. For example, here I want to create a DTO for my post, for my creating a new task. For this, I say create. What is my item? Is task. What's my entity? Task item and DTO. DTO. Okay, and here I want, when the client wants to create a new task, we have to let him to only send 2 items. The first one is public string and is task title. Okay, and get set. And after that, another string is description. Maybe you ask yourself, hey, why we don't have ID? Why we don't have is completed here? Okay, in my DTO. Because when a task is created, we can decide that it start as an incomplete. For example, when we create a new task, it means we didn't complete that task, and for default value is false. Okay, now it's time to go to our controller, and we have to come here and we need some changes. And I come here. I told you we shouldn't let the client to send the entity to the API. For this reason, I don't want the client send the task item. Which model the client should send? The DTO, create task DTO, and we say create task item DTO. Okay, now everything has been changed a little, because here everything has been changed, and in here I want the client, let me change to this, and here the context task, and it should be a little different. Now we don't want the client at first send the task. For this reason, I have to come here and do some changes, and here I want to create where task, and I want to change it to the task DTO. Okay, and come here and say, hey, we want to create a new task item, my entity. Okay, and do something like this. The task title in my entity is title. It should be something like the task DTO dot task title, and after that the description is, let me remove that and do something like the description, and after that is completed description, and is completed we set the false, because when we start a new task the default value is false. Okay, and here everything is okay. Title is task DTO task title, description is task DTO description, and is completed is false. And then the entity framework core save here I saved task here, and we add this to our task, and the entity framework core save the entity into the task data table. So the separation is the main reason we use DTO. Okay, now the next step is model validation. Now it's time to know what is a model validation. In the next part, we are gonna to talk about the model validation. So what is the model validation? I told you we still have another problem. Okay, what if the client sends this, for example, the task title empty and the description empty? We probably don't want to create an empty task. It's meaningless. Okay, so let's add some validation to our DTO. We can use data annotation using system component model data annotation. Okay, we go to our DTO, and here we can do something like this. For example, we don't want the client send the task title empty. For this, I come here and say require. Okay, and I copy that, and I want to use for the description, because we also want the task title and the description don't be empty. And now we are telling the ASP.NET Core that, hey, the task title and the description are required, and the client cannot send both of them empty. Okay, and another one is we can also control the length of our task title. For example, we can use maximum length. For example, I want the maximum length of the task title to be, for example, 100. Okay, and you can also use a lot of data annotation. And I will copy all of the task, all of the important data annotation on the description of this video. So we are also, I told you, we are also limiting the maximum length. So now it's time to test that. For example, if I send a valid request, let me run the project. Let me come here and run the project. Now the client cannot send the task title and the description empty. Okay. If I come here and do something like this, for example, come here, try it out. and do something. Now, if you pay attention, now the client cannot send the ID and it's completed because we don't let the client use the entity, I mean task item entity model, because we don't want the client work with our important entity model that we are using in our database. For this reason, we are using DTO. I told you, we use DTO for separate the concern. Okay, here, for example, I say the task title is, for example, next video is error handling. Okay, in the next video we are gonna talk about error handling, and after that authentication and authorization. But now it is a test, and after that press execute. Now we create a new task. Okay, but let me refresh the page. Now if I get all of the tasks, now I have 4. The last one, the next video, is error handling. But what happens if I come here and use, for example, this one empty? Sorry, try it out, and I want to use that empty, and this one also empty. Okay, if I run the execute, okay, I got a bad request. Okay, what's happened? Let me close that. And because I want to explain you, if you come here in your task controller, here you have API controller. I told you I will explain you in the next video. Now it's time to talk about the API controller because it's so important, my friends. You know, if I send, I told you, if I send an empty task title or description empty, the validation fails. And because our controller use API controllers, it's so important. And the ASP.NET Core automatically returns a 400 bad request response, and that's for the existing of the API control, and we don't have to manually check model state in every action. Okay, did you see what happened? And this is one of the useful feature provided by the ASP.NET Core API controller behavior. Okay, now it's time to update and create a DTO for update and change the controller. You can see what happened. In each video, we are making progresses and we are learning new things. For example, in the next video, we are going to learn error handling. After that, we are going to work with the authentication, authorization, JWT. You are going to learn everything about the API. Let's do that, the update DTO. So now it's time to creating our update DTO. Okay, now let's think about the updating a task. For updating a task, what does it mean updating a task? It means you want to change the behavior of one of your tasks. For example, I promise you to create, for example, a Docker video, and I record that and it's completed. Now I want to change the it's completed from the false to the true. For this reason, for an update, the client needs to send, let me come here, and I want to create an update task item DTO. Right click on your DTO, add new class, and what's your activity here is update. What is your entity? Is entity, sorry, update task item, and is DTO. Okay, and if I come here to the create, I copy all of them and come here and paste that. But there's only another thing. Okay, I told you but it still shouldn't control the ID, and it's completed is actually something we may want to update separately depending on how we design our API. For example, I come here and say public boolean, okay, and is completed. Now our update DTO is ready. So let's create so now it's time to modify our put endpoint. For this is then I come here to the task controller. So now our put endpoint can receive this DTO instead of this entity. For this is then I come here. Let me close all of them because I don't need that. And here we for create now. Oh, okay, for the put, instead of receiving the task item, I have to receive update task item DTO. I want to change to the task DTO, and after that I need to change that. First of all, I told you I have to find the task is the existing task, and here I have to change that. Okay, for the task, for example, here the existing task title is task DTO dot task title, task DTO description, and task DTO is completed. So notice that the ID comes from the root. Okay, put, I mean here, put it means API task. For example, the ID is 5. Okay, not from the request, but it's so important. That's another benefit of separating our API model from our database entity. So it's time to run the project and test our put endpoint. Wait. Sorry. Okay, it's time. Put, I come here, for example, say, hey, ID number, for example, 5. Now, if you pay attention, I only can change the task title description and it's completed because it's update task item DTO. For example, here, set is JWT, description is new description, and it's completed is false. Okay. I come here. Now let me change the true because put the execute. Okay, it's done. And if I come here, try it out. Now you can see JW2 a new description and is true. But in the next part, we are gonna to talk about one of the most important point that every C# developer make mistakes. So let's do that. So, my friend, I wanted to tell you one of the most important points that every junior or middle developer can make mistake. Okay, this a DTO is not just a shorter version of your entity. Don't forget. A DTO is not just a shorter version of your entity. You should design a DTO, for example, based on what your API needs to receive or return. It's so important. What you need to receive or return. And your entity represents your data and, for example, persisting model. Because, your DTO represents your API contracts, and these two models can evolve independently. For example, for a small project, this might look like an extra code, and maybe you say it's useless, okay? But as your application grows, directly exposing your entity can create a serious problem. For example, when you have a big project, you need to create DTO. For example, if you add a new property to task item later, you don't automatically want that property to become a part of your public API. That's why DTO are useful. Don't forget that. So, in this video, we improve our task API in 3 important ways. Don't forget that. First, we stop using task item here in our task, in our post, and in our put. Okay, and we create a DTO to define exactly what our API accept. And third, and the second, we stop using task item directly as the input model. And the third one, we add a model validation to prevent invalid data from entering our application. Like this. For example, if you come here, these are our model validation. For example, require the maximum length. And for example, now our flow is now something like this. If I come here and do something, now the request comes in. After that, it's a DTO. After that, a validation and entity. After that, and EF core. Entity framework core, and it go to SQL server. Okay, sorry, server. And that's a much better foundation for our API. There is still a problem, and our controller is standing to contain database and business logic. It's not so good. And as the application grows, putting everything inside controller becomes difficult to maintain. In the next video, we are gonna to talk about the error handling. It's so important how we can manage our error handling. Okay, and after that, we are gonna to talk about the security, authentication and authorization. What is a JWT? What is an authentication? What's the difference between authentication and authorization? In this playlist, you are gonna to learn everything about the API. Don't worry. I will see you in the next video, but don't forget to like and subscribe the channel. Goodbye.